Hello, and welcome to Fantasy Writing for Barbarians. I'm John Negroni. I am a published fantasy author with over 10 years of experience as a professional writer and editor. Now, the reason we call this show Fantasy Writing for Barbarians is because we're not just a show for beginner writers, we're also a show for barbarian writers. Now, you can define barbarian writer however you like, but the way that I think of it is that there are a lot of you, I think, who maybe you would classify yourself as a beginner, but maybe also as somebody who has a lot of passion, a lot of energy and desire to be an accomplished writer, whatever that means for you. And you want to write something great and you want to put it out there. But you're a little bit maybe barbaric, just in the sense where you don't know what to do with all this energy and ferocity that you might feel inside. So that's really what the show is trying to accomplish ultimately. And our advice is trying to help those of you who are starting out, or maybe you've been writing for a bit, just try to find new ways, new paths to get your work to a place where you could be really proud of it. And it just feels great when you are writing something awesome, right? So with that said, we're going to do something a little bit different on the show today, because normally what we do is our producer, Natalia Emmons, sends me an advice prompt, something that I react to for the first time, reading it live off the air. But today we're actually going to be doing a critique. And Natalia has found a critique for me. I haven't seen this yet as well, so I don't actually know anything about what we're going to be reading and critiquing. But yeah, we've only done a critique, I think, once or twice before. I think this is the first time I'm going to be critiquing somebody's work on my own. So good luck me. Hopefully I can do it justice. And also giving our other producer, Bridget Surdock, a break today. No fact checking or clarification at the end. I'm sorry. I know everybody loves producer Bridget's takes, but we have some special stuff in store, though, for producer Bridget coming on the show soon. So I'll be sure to tease that. All right. And one quick thing, too, for those of you who don't listen to the end of the show, I realized the other day that I should be plugging this more. But if you have your own advice that you want to send me or our producers, you can do that very, very easily. All you have to do is email us, fantasywritingforbarbarians@gmail.com. It's in the show notes. Natalia is going to see that email, so I won't see the advice prompt before we do the recording, but she's going to be able to read that and let me know that we have something from a listener of the show. And also, you can join our Discord. We have an In-Between Drafts Discord for the larger website, and that's where you can chat with me. You can chat with other writers for In-Between Drafts, and we have other podcasts and stuff there too, if you're interested. And also, of course, the YouTube channel where it's audio only, but you can also comment on certain episodes. So if you have any questions very specific to an episode, that's probably the best place to do that, because we see those all the time, and I can react to those myself and all that. So the YouTube channel, you can just find it. The channel is my name, John Negroni, but we have the Fantasy Writing for Barbarians podcast on there. But all right, without further ado, let's get started with the critique. All right, so this is from username The Griffin TV. I like that username. And they put this in the Fantasy Writers subreddit on reddit.com, looking for feedback on my first 3 pages. High fantasy, 836 words. Now, for me, John speaking, I'm not going to critique all 836 words. I'm not actually sure how much I'm going to critique here. I'll probably critique only around 200 words for the sake of time, because, yeah, that would be a little bit long, but we'll play it by ear. We'll play it however we feel, right? So hopefully, though, this is going to be pretty helpful and insightful for the Griffin TV. All right, so they write here, hello, I am looking for any thoughts on if my first few pages are engaging, thought-provoking, and if it leaves the readers wanting for more. There's a little bit of a grammar typo there, so not a great first start, but that's okay. I do those all the time myself. So, okay, I'm going to be going by that criteria. Engaging, thought-provoking, leaving the reader wanting more. So, Griffin TV, if you are going to be listening to this, as we typically send these episodes out to the people who post on the Reddit, I will be going by those terms. And also, as I read your page, I'm going to let you know where I would stop reading if I would stop reading. And so it might feel a little bit harsh, but I promise it's all coming from a place of trying to be helpful, but also being honest. Griffin TV writes, I have always enjoyed writing, and I'm about 200 pages into my first novel. And I haven't asked for much feedback as I'm not done, but I am curious of how people like my opening. I have revised it a bit, and I think it is pretty much where I'd like it to be for an official critique. I'd really appreciate any time you give the first few chapters. Comments are on the doc if you like, but you can also leave your feedback here, of course. Feel free to be harsh and to the point. That's how I'm able to grow as a stronger writer. Thank you in advance, and I do hope you like it to some extent. Well, I love the Griffin TV's attitude here, humble, but also in this for the right reasons, wanting to grow, knowing that, when they say it's like, yeah, they've revised this a bit, but it's where they've gotten it to a place where they're ready for an official critique. And I like that. I think that that's a great attitude to have. Typically, I never give Reddit my stuff. Me personally, I much prefer beta readers. They're going to be harsh too, but sometimes I worry about, especially if it's your first book, it can be hard without experience to discern good advice from bad advice. And it's tough because sometimes Reddit is awesome in this respect and you're going to get fantastic advice from people. But if you've been listening to this podcast and we've gone into some Reddit posts where a couple of comments will be great, they'll have great advice, and then a couple will be awful. Yeah, it's one of those things that it gets easier as you write more and more and you start learning this stuff. It gets a little bit easier to parse these things out and to have more confidence, right, in what you think is good or more nuanced and all of that. But yeah, I think that it's good that they're reaching out, but I always personally, defer to beta readers and trust, people you can email with. And there are a lot of different ways to do that, of course. And maybe I'll do an episode one of these days about writing communities and how you can find resources for that. But if you don't want to wait, there's always Google, do a ChatGPT, whatever you like, find a way to summon that resource for yourself if you can. So yeah, 200 pages into their first novel. Congratulations. That's an awesome accomplishment. So every novel's a little bit different in terms of how many words would be in those pages, but 200 pages, I mean, that's probably, I think, going to be close to like 60 to 70,000 words, something like that. So that means that you should be past the halfway point if this is high fantasy and it's your first book. I've talked about word count before, but for a debut novel, you really, even with high fantasy, you don't want it to be longer than something like 120,000 words, but I won't dwell on that for now. But and that's not relevant to this critique, just putting it out there, something that hit my mind. But all right, let's take a look at the actual thing. And I will say this too, actually, because I'm looking at the Google Doc and we don't know the name and we don't know if there are any subgenres and we don't kind of have any sort of indication like a summary paragraph, not even a summary paragraph, but some kind of framing paragraph that tells me like, what are your comparative titles? This is this book meets this book, or this is like a high fantasy that, takes some of the, the tone of this novel and combines it with the attitude of this movie or TV show, something like that. That's pretty helpful for these critiques because it's a good exercise for you, the writer, to get used to pitching your book to people and giving them a sense of what the book is before they start reading. That's something you're going to have to do if you want to be traditionally published. But even if you self-publish, you're going to want to have a really like a killer synopsis or something that kind of, marketing wise gets people interested. Like if they go to the Amazon and they see the first like little paragraph there, it should be something along the lines of, here's what this book is, this is the kind of book it is, blah, blah, blah. And then you kind of get into the premise. So for you, when you're asking for critique, I highly, highly recommend that you put that in the body post of what you're doing. If you send it to beta readers too, same deal. Tell us a couple things, tell us the name of the book, and again, some comparative titles and stuff like that. And a good resource for this, if you are like, well, I don't even know where to start, a great place to start with this is there's another great podcast about writing, much better than this one because it's more all-encompassing, but it's called The S Word No One Tells You About Writing. It's a great resource. Basically, it's a podcast where it's one of the more popular writing podcasts, but they have two agents on the show and they go through different query letters and they give feedback on those query letters. So that's actually really helpful because you learn a lot from their critiques on how to do this sort of thing and just like little tips and tricks for how to get people situated into your story. And I'll say this, and I know I'm kind of going on, but another reason you want to do this is because you wouldn't expect somebody to read the first page of your novel sight unseen, right? There are a bunch of different steps somebody's going to go through if they are going into a bookstore. They're going to go into the bookstore and your book is going to be in a certain section that's going to tell them not just that this is sci-fi fantasy, not just high fantasy, but it's going to be in a certain part of the high fantasy. It's going to be next to other books that are similar to it. Even if it's alphabetical order, usually there's some categorization that goes on there, right? Whether it be adult fantasy, young adult fantasy, and all of that. Another thing is, yes, they say you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but we do that anyway. You're never going to get around that. And the good thing about a book cover is that it does a lot of work for us. It tells us, the tone kind of, it gives us a sense like if it's a very harsh and severe kind of cover, oh, okay, so this is going to be maybe action. Maybe it's going to be, the title too is going to give us a sense of like, oh, maybe this is a war because the title of it is, the Battle of Blood and Ash or something. It's like, oh, okay, so this is like a war high fantasy. It's the same kind of thing you can do and honestly, like a summary kind of paragraph of like, this is the name of my book. This is the kind of tone I'm going for. You want to do the bookstore experience, but in like a little bit of a paragraph and communicate the same things, even to people who are critiquing, because that's going to help the critiquer have more context and frame of reference in their mind for what kind of book they're reading in the same way, again, as if they were shopping. And even down to like the thickness of the book. If I have the book in my hands and I feel that it's very big, that tells me not just high fantasy, but this is like going to be epic fantasy. It's going to be like the first of a whole series. That's going to put something in my mind of what to expect when I actually read your pages. So again, definitely a helpful tip for a lot of you who also might be listening and you might want to have some people critique your stuff as well. That's something that I highly recommend. And a lot of people do this already on the Reddit, on the fantasy writer subreddit. So yeah, just in this case, that's my suggestion. Okay, so they start this off with not chapter 1, but just 1, which I like. That's different. That's kind of fun. So here we go. Varum kept his eyes closed and remained motionless. He had awoken due to a quiet scuffling sound on the floor outside his room. Perhaps it was a boot, but it was barely audible. Okay, so this is about where I would stop reading. I'm very sad to say. This is where I would stop, and 2 key reasons. The first sentence is very generic. It does not tell us enough. Second sentence is where I was waiting for us to get a little bit more important information, but we just did not get it. So this is my assumption reading this. I think the writer may have gotten some advice or some feedback that they should start their manuscript with an active scene. But here's the problem. This starts with a character waking up, which is a huge red flag. You never want to start a story with a character waking up. It tends to tell readers who have seen a lot of this, like, oh, okay, so this is an amateur. Sometimes that's not very fair, and there are certainly plenty of examples where this isn't the case, but you just want to avoid it because you don't want people to think that you are an amateur. So never start with waking up. That is my number one advice for any opening. But also, you are kind of starting in the middle of things. In media res, you are starting in the middle of a moment. And the advice that you might be getting here, that I'm worried about, is like, oh, you should start with something active. That'll be exciting. The problem is, if for an action thing to be exciting or like a moment with tension and suspense, like who's outside of this room, I need more information. More important information that is going to make me care about the action that is happening. If you, for example, start with just a fight between 2 people, one has a sword, one has an axe, that's not exciting to me, even though like, okay, yeah, objectively, seeing 2 people fight is exciting. But without context or without any sort of reason for me to be engaged, that it's just kind of fluff. It's kind of noise. Remember, when you're reading a book, your mind has to work harder to imagine this stuff. And because your mind has to work harder, people are more prone to stop reading because if they don't feel like they're being rewarded for what they're reading, that's what kind of turns them away. So your first sentence here, Varum kept his eyes closed and remained motionless. All this, first of all, I don't know that he was asleep. So this is a little bit of a confusing thing to me. He kept his eyes closed. Was he sleeping? Like, it's just kind of like, it feels like the sentence before this is pretty important. Whereas the next sentence is, he had awoken due to a quiet scuffling sound on the floor outside his room. Perhaps it was a boot, but it was barely audible. Again, all I know about this character, I only know 3 things. His name, which, by the way, I don't love the name Varum. It's hard to, it doesn't flow very well. It doesn't read very well when I read it out loud, and I'm a reader who reads things out loud all the time. And so that's just a little bit of a thing for me. Varum is just kind of, it's spelled Varum for those listening. Take that with a grain of salt. Just me personally, I did not love reading that out loud. But anyway, so we know that his name is Varum. We know that he's a guy. So actually it's 4 things. And we know that he is asleep. So that's the second thing. We know that, or the third thing, so the guy. And then we know that when he heard something happening outside of his room, he kept his eyes closed and kind of froze. So maybe he's a coward, but that's not very clear. He could be doing that for multiple reasons. That's the reason I stopped reading, because you have pushed me into kind of an active scene. but I don't really know. I don't have any context for who this person is, where they are, what's going on. It's just kind of jumping me in a little bit too quickly. So the way to fix something like this is I need something to hook me to Verum, to care about his well-being, or not even his well-being, but to give me a sense of what kind of person is in this situation. So instead of saying his name, giving him a description, the something. Now, I can maybe do this after I read a little bit more. So I'm actually going to put a pin in that and keep going. And also, I'm not going to give like line level feedback here. There's nothing outlandish or necessarily wrong about any of the writing here, but it's not very evocative. It doesn't really put me anywhere. I feel like it comes off as a little bit generic. It's like a bedroom, I guess, and a floor. You could add a few more descriptive details to make this kind of come alive a little bit more. Something that you don't want it to be purple prose in the sense that it's like a bunch of adjectives for no reason, but you do want something that's going to be more vivid, that's going to evoke imagery. And if it sounds like I'm saying a lot, it's like, gosh, John, this is just the first two sentences. Yeah, it's the first two sentences. These are the most important sentences of the novel. So this is kind of the end all be all. You really need to hook the reader here. And there are many ways you can do this, and sometimes you can have simple writing, but it's all a balance. If the writing is going to be a little bit simple and generic, you need to have something that grabs our attention where all that generic writing can circle around. So what I mean is if you start with, instead of Verum, you could say something that's contradictory, like the banished knight or something like that. That's not great, but like something that just gets me quickly like, oh, a knight who was banished. I wonder why he was banished. And then you kind of have this like sort of like, oh, something's happening outside the room. That's what gets us kind of interested and intrigued, right? Because you're framing everything. Knight makes me think medieval. Banished makes me think dark past. They did something wrong. It gets you guessing, and you want to keep going to get a payoff for that. And then you can get into something kind of active. Somebody's outside the room, and then you can slowly sort of, let's get to know this character through an active scene. So that's what I mean. You could start with action, but the advice to like just start with action, take it with a grain of salt. This kind of advice needs to be complemented by understanding the beginning of any story and how to frame things so that the action is going to be exciting for a good reason. All right, so let's read the third sentence. I feel bad. I really went on there. But anyway, he slightly adjusted the grip on his dagger under the bedsheets, and shortly after, his door unlocked with a click. Okay, so this at least tells me that he wasn't being a coward. He was just kind of waiting. But then that's confusing to me. Why would he keep his eyes closed? If he has the nerve to adjust the grip on his dagger after being motionless, it's a little strange. It's a little bit contradictory to the character. And if that's the purpose, I think you need a little bit more. I think you need to sort of say he snaps out of it, or snaps out of his cowardice and adjusts the grip on his dagger. That would tell me more about the character if that were the case. And then, the door unlocks with a click. So I guess that tells me somebody has the key. And so if somebody has the key, shouldn't he be thinking or like trying to weigh things in his mind of like, I feel like I don't have a sense of what the character is thinking at all here. There's no interiority. There's just reaction, which is not great. Fourth sentence, he listened for the turn of a door handle or the groan of rusted hinges, but no sound came. All was silent. A bead of sweat dripped from Verum's forehead as the knot in his stomach tightened. So I get a little bit here that like, okay, he's sort of fearful and he doesn't want to be in this situation. But again, there's no interiority. There's no sort of like, wait a second, like, why would the door be unlocked? Does somebody have a key? These are opportunities too, when you use interiority to break up these kind of simple sentences with a little bit more of your world building, with a little bit more of like who the character is and what kind of person they are. So for example, if somebody's waiting outside the door, he could be thinking like, I don't think that's the bedchamber maid or something like that. If he's a flirt, be like, oh, I told her not to come back, but wait a second, something's not right. This is an opportunity for you to give us a sense. But again, I don't have a sense of who this person is. This is the first paragraph. And all I'm getting is that they get nervous when something is happening in a hallway. And I don't know why they're nervous. There are all kinds of reasons they might be. But I need a little bit more, honestly. I need a little bit more of like why this character is the way that they are more quickly. And I need a little bit more of that conflict between, if they are a coward, should they be a coward? Is it expected that they are a coward? There are so many questions that we should be getting at least a hint of what kind of questions we should be asking, if that makes sense. So there's a difference between reading and guessing. So like when you're reading, you should be intrigued. Like I was saying in that first sentence with like the Banished Knight as an edit, that has you asking questions. But instead, where I'm here is like, I don't know which questions to ask because there are so many sort of like possibilities, if that makes sense. So let's go into the second paragraph. Worried the intruder might have already stepped into his room, thoughts of action raced through his head, but he had no time to implement any sort of plan. So this is strange to me because, again, why wouldn't he know that the intruder stepped into his room? So we haven't gotten a sense yet. Like, I guess it's super dark, but then again, why would he keep his eyes closed? So this doesn't really connect with real life. And in real life, if lights are off and I'm in the middle of sleeping, then my eyes are going to be adjusted to the darkness. I would probably be able to kind of see that somebody is in here. And rather than the narrator here telling me he has no time to implement any sort of plan, show don't tell, give me some kind of internal monologue of like trying to come up with a plan, but I can tell that it's too hasty. They don't have time. That is way more intriguing to me. It tells me more about the character than just you telling me like, well, there's no time for a plan. Show me that. This is a show don't tell opportunity, if you were. I think show don't tell is one of those things where people treat it like everything should be showing and not telling. There are some things you want to tell because it's more functional, it's more efficient, but you as the writer should be looking for show don't tell opportunities that when you're editing or you're going back through it, and I know the Griffin TV, the username of the person, they said that they have revised this a bit. And so when you revise it again, look for these opportunities of like, could I show this better than I tell it in any of these situations? Sometimes that won't be the case. Sometimes it will. Just before he opened his eyes, he heard the intruder clear his throat. Yeah, again, this is telling me the timing of this does not make sense to me. Why did he wait to open his eyes? Was it because he was tired? This is very strange to me. It does not read as plausible, quite honestly. And the other thing too is like here's an intruder clear his throat. How does he know, if he can't see the intruder, how does he know that the intruder is a man, right? So he can't see them, and somebody clearing their throat, honestly, if you wanted to indicate that they are male, then you kind of need to speak to that. It's like he heard the intruder clear their throat. Sounds like a man clearing their throat, if you ask me. Like something in some interiority, some kind of like him trying to make sense of what's happening. So yeah, that's kind of strange to me. The first dialogue here is, first of all, good morning. That's not bad. First of all, good morning. That's kind of an interesting thing to say as an intruder because it's a nice contradiction. You wouldn't expect an intruder in the middle of the night to say, first of all. It's a little weird because they say good morning. And again, it's like, well, they can't, I'm still under the indication that like they can't see anything, but is that only because they didn't open their eyes? And again, if they don't open their eyes, why didn't they open their eyes? See what I mean? It's like, I want to be asking different questions. I don't want to be asking these questions. I want to be asking like interesting questions of like, oh, who is this intruder? Why are they here? Like, that's where I want my mind to be as a reader. But instead, I'm asking questions about logistics, and stuff like this that's distracting. And that's what you don't want. With a heavy sigh, Varum opened his eyes and released his grip on the dagger. He peered through the dark strands of his unruly dark hair, and he realized it was indeed early morning. A hint of sunlight crept through the curtains of the window on the far side of the room, doing what it could to fill the room. So it's only now that we get this information that it's morning, that there's sunlight, and all this. So this doesn't really make sense. If this thing happened in a split second, then there is no reason that this is, looking at this, 3 paragraphs and 1 dialogue line. That is ridiculous. Like that is, because this has to be a split second to me. Like for him to adjust his, like he hears this stuff, adjusts his dagger, doesn't open his eyes, and then opens his eyes and looks into, like, this is like what, 1 or 2 seconds? It just, the timing of this doesn't work. I think that this needs to be rethought, because what are you trying to evoke here by this being a frantic situation? There are much better ways for it to be a frantic situation where there is fear and all that. And again, a character waking up is such a weak way to open a story. It really, first of all, you want to start a story more with a little bit of status quo, a little bit of like the character kind of doing their thing. And that can be a sentence. It doesn't have to be like a whole page. But the fact that we start off with what feels like it might be an inciting incident, that is way too rushed. And I definitely don't like that. And yeah, so we get some character details here. Apparently they know this person. I almost said that they have the dark hair, but the intruder apparently has unruly dark hair. It's weird that, well, actually, no, I guess I'm misreading this. This is kind of confusing because I guess they have bangs. So they're looking through their hair, which that's okay. Yeah, the way this is written, it was hard for me to discern whether or not they're talking about they're looking through the strands of the intruder's dark hair. And I don't think this quite works because it's a little bit. And again, we're a few paragraphs into this, and I don't really have a sense of the setting here. Like a dagger can be like a lot of different things, but a little bit more vivid details of what kind of room this is, like you're talking about curtains and windows and bed sheets, like that feels contemporary to me. And so if it's contemporary, you need to be a little bit more firm about that. But as it is, it feels like we're kind of out of time, which is not good. So next we have, secondly, you passed. Now tell me, when did you notice me? The voice questioned. That's strange to me. They passed? I mean, did they? Because it took them forever to open their eyes. All they did was grab their dagger and they were at this person's mercy. So that seems very strange to me. It sounds like an easy test. And also, it says the voice questioned. So they don't know who this person is. But then why did Verum have a heavy sigh? Because like a heavy sigh kind of tells me that this has me asking the wrong questions, because then I'm like, well, the heavy sigh kind of indicates to me, or at least leads me to wonder, like, oh, does that mean that they like know the person? It's like, oh, this person. Like that's kind of what that tells me. It doesn't tell me, but I guess like the other hint that I'm getting is that this is part of, because you say like you passed a test, which doesn't come to the next paragraph. That means like, oh, so they were expecting something like this. Again, this is something that I would seed much earlier, because look, if they're in the middle of a test, or like if it's something of like, the night, in the test to become a knight, the person was still asleep when this happened, I feel like you need something there to kind of, again, put me in this situation. But I think what's happening is the writer is trying to surprise me. The problem is that surprising me, it's a difficult thing to do because you want surprise to be earned. And I don't feel like the surprise here is earned. I feel like it's just like surprising in the wrong way. It doesn't feel like a way that is like inevitable, or like, I should have thought of that. It feels just kind of random, and it feels kind of arbitrary. All right, so then keep going on here. Disgruntled at being awoken at such an early hour and in such an unpleasant way, Verum groaned in rebellion towards the question. So if you are not writing, like if you are not from the UK or writing British, then you should not say towards with the S at the end. It should be toward. So same thing with like backward, forward. The S is only at the end of that in British spelling. But I don't know if this person is British, so that might be, fine for them. So yeah, let me look at this. So disgruntled at being awoken at such an early hour and in such an unpleasant way. Okay. I mean, I guess I buy that, but it's kind of weird. It's kind of telling me this person was trying to sleep in, but they were in a test. Again, I don't know what's going on. Like, it's just frustrating. Like, I don't really have a sense of the character here. I know I've said that like 10 times, but it's still true. I'm trying to be like, okay, so you're being awoken an early hour. Like, what does that say about you? But it could say a lot of things. There's not enough indication. And again, these are things that interiority of the character can deeply accomplish. It can have me kind of understanding who a character is and, where they are at. Little thoughts of like, oh, just wanted to get some sleep, but then this person had to show up. And again, that's showing instead of telling. It's showing kind of who this person is with their thoughts. But this kind of stuff of like groaned in rebellion towards the question, like, I don't know, like, it's a good question. If you're in some kind of test, like, what, I don't know, like, why is this an issue? The emotional reaction doesn't make sense to me. And again, when you're writing this stuff, you want me, the reader, to feel an emotion. And right now, I am feeling a little bit disconnected from the emotion that the main character is feeling, which is not good. So then they say, come now, Verum. I gave you 3 opportunities to detect my presence, the voice prodded. So that's the end of the first page. And, I'm not going to keep going. I think that, again, this is the first page. And the information I've been given here is definitely not leading me to want to read more. It's, again, I was already at that point in the second sentence. But what you have here, if you have a character who is dealing with a test and some difficulty with that test, this stuff should not be laid out. So like, I think this person is taking the advice of like, don't info dump, right? The advice you're going to hear all the time from, especially people on Reddit, is don't info dump. Don't put a bunch of exposition, which is great. Like, you don't want to do that, but also you do need to have info. Like, don't dump it, but you need info, right? If this person is taking a test, give me that information, you know? And I think what's happening here is this is that sort of thing where I know we had a whole episode about this. I think they're writing this as a scene in a movie. They have a scene playing out in their head that could be like live action, and they are just writing out what's happening. But that is not how you write a novel. Because I think, like, hopefully this is helpful for those of you who listen to that episode, and this kind of gives you a sense of what I was talking about. Those different questions and those things, if I was watching a movie and I saw these things, I wouldn't be asking these questions because the visual information would be enough to have me understanding context for things. The performance on the person's face, you know, them grabbing the dagger and it happening very quickly and me understanding the timing of everything. But also, I don't think it would work in a scene because if it's early morning, like, that would be kind of weird, right? But anyway, I would also kind of have a sense of like something dangerous is about to happen and it would be happening so quickly and I don't have to work as hard to put all the imaginative details in my head that I'm just letting the movie kind of play it out. That's why that works in a screenplay format. But this is not a screenplay. It is not a movie. You have other tools at your disposal. It doesn't mean that it's harder, but you need to change the way you write, I hate to say. Like, you have to change it to the way you would write a novel, which the way you would write a novel is you look at this page and you look at what this page is trying to accomplish. In the scene of the movie, what is it trying to accomplish? That a character is being woken up. They're in the middle of a test. They didn't know that that's what was going on. They grabbed the dagger, all this stuff. You can get that across by giving me little details. You know, the first sentence can give me a sense of like, what is the occupation of this person? Why are they where they are at? And, you know, tell me little things about like the grip on the dagger. Tell me something interesting about the dagger. It can be through internal monologue. It can be something like, good thing I have my father's dagger. You know, it's a good thing that, you know, I stole this dagger from that merchant 3 days ago. That tells me so many things like, oh, this person's a bit of a rapscallion, right? Or this person is close to their family. I wonder if they still are. Like, these are the little details that get me thinking. But again, you're writing it though as it's cinematic in the sense that you're not telling me these things because you're thinking like, oh, show don't tell, you know, or in this case, it's just tell. But you're just like, I just want to, you know, read out the scene and just, you know, you don't know all this. You don't know it's his father's dagger, but blah, blah, blah. That's not helpful though in novel format, because in novel format, you need frame, you need context, because when you're writing, you want the big picture of the novel to come through these line level writing choices. And yeah, as it stands, this just feels like something that's in your head and it's not getting from your head to my head. And that's the issue. And that's what's going to cause some problems as you try to like get this to more people. And yeah, so I hate to say it. Those are the main issues that I'm seeing here. There's not a ton for me to jump on here in terms of like your writing style. I mean, I guess you have some senses here of like, I think the dialogue, you know, the dialogue is not bad. It looks like you're giving it a lot of thought, and it does have like, but again, I think it's working because you are thinking in the screenplay format. And so that's why it's probably the only thing that is kind of coming through for me. But yeah, that's where I would work on this. The main way to work on this is for you to take a look at the first pages of a few books that you like. Look at a few books that, you know, you would comp this to, that you would find like, oh, my book is going to be like this. And look at how they do it. And you'll notice that they have way more information. Like, do what I'm doing here. Take a book by George R. R. Martin or Robert Jordan or R.F. Kuang, whoever it is, and be a critiquer. You know, try to do what I'm doing and look at those little details and be like, huh, okay. You know, that's the kind of thing that has me thinking. So back to your criteria. Engaging. I'm sorry, I was not engaged. I did not feel engaged with Verum. I didn't feel that character. They did not feel like a character to me. I just didn't have anything there with that character. I didn't know anything about the character. in terms of thought-provoking. Maybe this stuff comes in later because I'm not reading the full 136 words, but look, you don't have a lot of time with readers. You want the engaging and the thought-provoking stuff to happen on the first page. And yes, it did not leave me wanting more, I'm sorry to say, but don't give up. I think that you're going to get lots of different critique from a lot of different people. And this is hopefully for you going to be a starting point. And I think that the actionable thing for you to do is to take a look at your work and really start thinking of it in a different light. Now, maybe I'm being a little bit too harsh, and maybe this is something you got a little bit better at as you went. I'm not sure. But yeah, I would just take a look again at some books that you think work for you and try to study, even write down yourself, like write it down to get a sense of like the flow, stuff like that. Stuff that like really helps you understand like, oh yeah, like they have this kind of rat-a-tat in terms of like explaining something, internal monologue, a little bit of exposition, something active and dialogue, etc. And there are only a couple of comments here. There's one from Here for the Staples who writes, he had no time to implement any plan. I guess that's responding to a typo that they must have fixed because I didn't see that. But then they also said, when writing in this voice, I was told a good method is to draft it, pantomime it while narrating, then rewrite. It's supposed to flesh out the scene you're setting. Great piece you've got going. Yeah, I definitely not going to agree with that last part there. I don't know. I've never pantomimed something while narrating, but I do like to, yes, draft something and read it out loud. That's very, very helpful. It just helps you get a sense of like the flow and how things are going to sound actually when you do it out loud. And then it looks like this other comment here is referring to something that I did not get to because it's referring to a character that I didn't get the name of. The last comment here is from Outlandishness Lazy 14 who says, really like it. I agree that after finishing a first draft, going back and reading it out loud will be a great way to flesh out and smooth out the lines. You got me hooked though, so good job. I feel bad because I'm like, sorry y'all, but this is Reddit for you. I think that these folks, like, I'm just going to have to disagree with them. I don't find anything hooky about this, and I'm worried that this is going to give the original poster, the Griffin TV, kind of a false sense. I don't think an agent's going to respond to this. I think an agent's going to look at this, and a lot of these red flags I'm talking about are going to stop him in their tracks. But again, I'm only judging the first 836, so maybe I'm totally wrong, and like it's just that first page that you need to fix up if you're listening to me. But the rest of it could be amazing. I don't know. But okay, so hopefully that was helpful, and I feel a little bit, I feel like hopefully I didn't come off as too aggressive there, but they asked for honesty, and that's what they got from me, that's for sure. But thank you so much for listening to the show, everybody. And if you have something you want me to critique and you're listening and you're like, oh gosh, I want the John Negroni treatment. Maybe you've been in a similar situation where you sent some work to people and you get feedback like that, like, oh, really like it. And, they weren't very specific, were they? But if you want somebody to take a look at your stuff and give you that honesty, I'm always down to do a first page. It's a lot to ask to do more than a first page, quite honestly. But I'm always happy to do at least one page and just give you some honest feedback on the show. Again, if you want to do that, you can email us fantasywritingforbarbarians@gmail.com. With that, I'm going to call it here. But thanks so much for listening. And thanks so much to our producer, Natalia Emmons, for sending me this critique. And also thank you to producer Bridget Surdock, who has this episode off. I hope you're enjoying it. And yeah, we'll see you all pretty soon, I hope. So for now, thanks again. And be sure to keep on writing if that's what you feel like doing.